are the most distracted people in the history of the world. This is no hyperbole, and it is no accident. If you've ever felt like there's some conspiracy against your soul, against your ability to pray, to focus, to worship, to connect deeply, that's because there is. So in November of 2017, Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, had an interview with a news website called Axios, and in it, he said, I'm going to quote this at length, it's worth hearing. Sean Parker, founding president of Facebook, he says, when Facebook was getting going, I had these people who would come up to me and say, like, I'm not on social media. And I'd be like, okay, you know you will be. And they would say, no, I really value my real life interactions. I value the moment. I value presence. I value intimacy. And I would say, we'll get you eventually. I don't know if I really understood the consequences of what I was saying because of the unintended consequences of a network when it grows to 1 billion or 2 billion. It literally changes your relationship with society, with each other. It probably interferes with with productivity in weird ways. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. And then here's the key quote here. The thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while. Someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever, and it's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you more likes and more comments. It's a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. How do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? So Seth Godin, the marketing guru, famously observed about the same time frame. He observed on his blog, your phone doesn't just work for you. It works for big corporations. You are not the only customer here. You are the product. What's being sold is your attention. Godin writes it like this. When your phone grabs your attention, when it makes you feel inadequate, when it pushes you to catch up, to consume, to fret, it's not working for you. We are the most distracted people in the history of the world, and this is no hyperbole, and it is no accident. It's not only increasing the pace and productivity of our lives, it's taking something from us. It's diminishing our capacity for attention, and I'm going to suggest today our capacity for delight. So I want you to imagine you go on a hike at Bryn Coed Nature Reserve. Now, if you've never been there, it is like a little taste of like the new heavens and new earth. It's really magical. The fields right now, they're like bursting with colors and the smell of all these wildflowers. There's literally thousands of butterflies flying around and these giant trees, like mighty 300-year-old oaks reaching their arms to the sky. Like I go there and I want to take off my shoes because I feel like I'm walking on holy ground. It's amazing. So imagine I share this experience with you of like how fantastic, the sheer delight of being in this space. And you're convinced. You're like, this week, I'm going to go, you said Tuesday, I'm going to take off on my lunch break, I'm going to go over there to the preserve, and I'm going to go on a hike. And so you set your mind to it, you show up there at the nature preserve, and then right as you pull in to experience the sheer delight that Paul talked about, your phone vibrates, and you look down, and you find out things at the office, they're just blowing up. Like something at work went sideways, the project went off the rails, it's careening out of control. Suddenly you're on a group text and it's blowing up thing after thing after thing. But you're like, hey, I'm already here, I'm on a hike, I'm working virtually anyways, I can work anywhere. Why not work while I'm on my hike? So you go on the hike, but the whole time you're texting, you're managing problems, you're putting out fires, you're like, move that meeting, and I didn't say that, and how can we solve this right now? Now, imagine that experience. If that's your experience of Bryn Coed Nature Preserve, you may have just walked on holy ground. Like there might be butterflies flying around and mighty oaks reaching their arms to the sky, and all of that might be true. Wildflower petals might be opening just for you. But unless, like a bald eagle swoops down and steals your cell phone, you would never know any of it. You'd see nothing. And not just you wouldn't see the beauty and goodness, like you would literally see nothing. You might as well be walking through a parking lot or standing in line at Walmart. You would be trapped inside yourself. Trapped inside solving those problems, thinking about analyzing the past problems and thinking towards future solutions. You'd be choked by stress and by distractions. You would be completely unaware. And that's what I want to talk about today. How do we, in the most distracted age in the history of the world, when there is a literal conspiracy to capture, to steal, to sell off, monetize our attention, how do we move from distraction to awareness? How do we move from all these things that are calling out, trying to steal our attention, to being fully present? How do we relearn how to see goodness and beauty and experience the very presence of God in our midst? So we're in this series on delight. What lies at the intersection of wonder and beauty, that thing. And in week 1, we saw that delight is really, really important, that it feeds, it supports, it nurtures, it roots all of our love, all the things that are most important in life, and that we're created, like God created our world full of goodness and beauty. It's created and He delights in it, and we're made in His image. We're created to delight. And that he's literally filled our world with delightful things, with goodness and beauty. And that Jesus came to show us, to lead us in that way. And we saw that even up to the night of his death, He came that our joy might be complete, that we might delight in Him, that we might live with God, that we might once again experience the goodness and beauty. And yet, we saw in week 2 that for some odd reason, this is not often our experience, that we tend to fear, unlearn, and avoid delight. To quote the psychologist Chip Dodd, we make a habit of practicing hopelessness. Like we have a habit of giving up our delights. We don't chase them anymore. We don't go after what we really long for in life. We don't even seek to fulfill our desires anymore. That there are these invisible walls that stop us. And last week we talked about 3, our perspective, our priorities, and other people that stop us from actually chasing after those things. This week I want to transition and start talking about how to nurture these things. Now I was planning on this week having just one big sermon where we put a bow on this series and we talk about how do we nurture our delight. But the more I dug into it, the more I thought we need to slow down. Because I don't know about you, but in the midst of this pandemic, I could stand to spend a few weeks soaking in this. I could stand to spend a little bit more time really diving deep into these types of questions. And today, I just want to spend our entire time over this one aspect of how we nurture our delight. And that's how do we move from distraction to awareness? How do we who live in this world that is so distracting move into an awareness of God's presence and His goodness and His beauty that He's put all around us in our lives? Our text for today is a classic. It's Luke chapter 10, the story of Mary and Martha. If you know it, I'm so glad. Hang on. We might actually unearth some other things, some fresh things for you today. If you don't know the story, you're going to want to earmark this. It's a classic. It's Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38. And the story begins like this. As Jesus and His disciples were on their way, He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to Him. And in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is always on the way. He's traveling somewhere. And hospitality in that culture is a big, big, big deal. It was costly. It involved a lot of work. It meant that you would have to drop everything. There was no way to let someone know you were coming. You would just show up. So someone shows up and you just have to drop everything, literally like kill animals and grind wheat and do all the preparations to feed them. Hosting was about displacing your life and your priorities and putting the guests first. And it was a big, big deal. So in the first century Palestine, everyone would have seen this and said, Martha is such a good woman. The fact that she's willing to drop everything and let 13 men come into her house to be hospitable to them, she must be so, so godly. Verse 39. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Verse 40. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And this contrast right here that we see in these two verses, this contrast is going to be the heart of the story. It's almost comical the way these two women are, these two sisters are compared to one another. 13 men pile into the house. Martha is the godly hostess. She's running around, stressed out of her mind with all the things that need to be done. And Mary is reclining in the living room. Martha is lost in a flurry of activity. She's multitasking, getting things done, starting the next thing before she's finished the last one. And Mary is oblivious to all of this. All Martha can see is all the tasks that need to be done. All Mary can see is Jesus. Martha feels this responsibility, this cultural pressure. Something deep within her is pushing her to perform, to achieve, to do what others expect of her. And Mary seems to feel none of this. Martha seems to believe that she needs to do something in order to be accepted to sit at Jesus' feet, and yet Mary doesn't seem to feel any of this. Let me just say, if you find yourself regularly annoyed by people around you who seem oblivious to all the stuff that needs done, you, my friend, are a Martha. If you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, you're a Mary. So this is clearly a personality dynamic here, but don't miss this. Don't miss this. It's more than a personality profile that Luke's giving us. So the text specifically uses this phrase, Mary sat at the Lord's feet, and this is not just a description of where she was sitting. This is actually a technical phrase. To sit at the feet of a teacher is a technical phrase used to describe a rabbi-disciple relationship. So to sit at the feet of the Lord is to say that she is acting like a disciple and he is the rabbi. So there's an ancient Jewish text called the Mishnah, and it describes this rabbi-disciple relationship like this. It says, "Let your house be a meeting house for the sages, and sit amid the dust of their feet, and drink in their words with thirst." So this is the picture here, that Jesus comes to their house. Martha has opened up her home to a great sage, right? She's opened up her home. She's in the first part that. But Mary is actually the one who's sitting there thirstily drinking in every word that comes from his mouth. She's the one who is sitting in the position of a disciple of Jesus right now. So, what might not be obvious from this, what we might not fully appreciate, especially from our 2020 perspective, is just how wrong this is from a first century Palestinian perspective. Women are supposed to be in the kitchen fixing dinner in first century Palestine. They are not supposed to be inviting themselves into the teaching of a rabbi. Women don't just invite themselves into an all-male event, and Mary does. Martha, on the other hand, in this context, in this culture, is clearly in the right. She's the good one. She's godly. She's the one who deserves praise. And Mary is clearly in the wrong culturally. Not only is she not doing what she's supposed to do, fixing dinner, she's doing exactly what she's not supposed to do. She's invited herself into the living room among the men, just invited herself in that culture. Martha's the good one, Mary's the bad one. Martha is the godly one, Mary is ungodly. She deserves a scolding or a shaming or something. And Martha, this is boiling up in these two verses. Martha can't take it anymore, and we see in verse 40, the rest of the verse 40, it reads, "She came up to him," Martha came up to Jesus and asked, "Lord, Don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Lord, don't you care that my sister is completely inappropriate? She's selfish, she's presumptuous, she's unhelpful right now. Don't you care? And with this, with Martha in her boldness coming up to Jesus, something happens. Do you see this? Jesus comes into our house. The very God of the universe has shown up. He's there to be with her in the flesh, to be with her, to share a meal with her. And this should be, by all accounts, the very best day of her life. But it isn't, is it? Somehow, for Martha, in preparing a meal, doing her best to follow the rules, doing what she's supposed to do, somehow she has ended up stressed, anxious, frustrated at her sister, and convinced that Jesus doesn't care. Somehow Jesus himself has shown up in her house, and she's completely missed it. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered. So in Hebrew, if you double something, it intensifies it. So creation is not just good. It's not just tov. It's tov, tov. It's good, good. And the temple, the first part of the temple, is not just holy, but this is where the priests come before the Lord. So it is holy, holy. Here Jesus says to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Martha, you have let many things pull you away. Many things distract you, and all these good things, they're stealing your attention. They're robbing your awareness that God himself is in your midst. They've blinded you to the good, the beautiful, the holy that is all around you. So, there's a tendency to take Martha and throw her under the bus at this point and put Mary up on a pedestal. And I just want to be careful how we think through this because this is not a personality profile thing. Martha isn't evil, and sitting around the living room isn't necessarily good. The problem is not that Martha is in the kitchen or that she's working. If you look at this, the text gives us some clues that it's deeper. And we can't say for sure, but it sure seems that Martha's problem, if it's not working, that there is a problem of self-righteousness in her heart. That somehow she believes that because she's working hard, doing what she's supposed to do, that she's somehow better than her sister. The problem that with Martha is that she seems to find her sense of self-worth or her identity and her performance here. So that anyone who doesn't act like she does or do what she does, so her sister's not doing what she does, therefore she's better than her. The problem is that Martha seems to be letting her culture define what's important. Her culture tells her she should be in the kitchen and Mary shouldn't be there, so that's the issue. The problem is that Martha assumes Jesus doesn't care. So if you take Martha as she is and you plop her in the living room, that does not solve the problem. The goal is not to get Martha to sit in the living room all day. The goal is to deal with the heart issues. The goal is that wherever she's at, wherever we're at, whether we're in the kitchen or the living room, that we would enjoy the presence of Jesus, be aware of his goodness, beauty, holy presence in our midst, whether we're working or whether we're sitting. There's one key phrase in here that is helpful. It says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. And then it literally says Mary has chosen what is better. She's chosen the better portion or the better meal. Like you're in there cooking a meal so that our stomachs will be satisfied, but she's going to be satisfied with something better. It's Martha, you're in the kitchen slaving away over that, but you're missing the main course. That's the connotation here. Get the implication. Jesus is saying that by pursuing all these good things, and can you imagine something better? fixing dinner for Jesus and the disciples. By pursuing all these good things, she's actually missing out on the best thing. That by allowing all these good things to distract her and capture her attention, she's unable to enjoy what life is all about. Now, isn't this ironic? That in the attempt to pursue, to do what's right, to do what's good, in the attempt to pursue all the good things, the attempt to pursue peace and happiness and do good for others and serve to others, we can fill our lives with more and more. We can fill our hearts with more and more. We can chase after more and more good things until our lives, our interests, our hearts are so overfilled, so stuffed with good stuff that we begin to fall apart. Our souls get pulled in so many directions that our sense of worth, our sense of purpose, our ability to connect with what's ultimate, with what's good, with what's beautiful, it begins, and the word is this, it begins to disintegrate. When we get pulled in so many directions, our soul begins to disintegrate, to come apart at the seams. We lose a sense of who we are. We lose a sense of what we're looking for and why we started down this road in this first place. So we become very, very busy, and we don't know why. We're moving at an extreme pace, and we're not quite sure. Our lives are very, very full, but not satisfied. And that's what distractions do to Martha and to us. They steal our peace. They fill us with anxiety. They separate us, divide us from others, make us frustrated at others, drive a sense of outrage. And they diminish our capacity to enjoy the presence of God in our lives. This, my friends, is an almost perfect description of what is happening in our society at large right now. And not just in our society, in us. So distraction is not a modern thing, right? Martha lived in a pre-modern era, but technology, while it does not cause a life of distraction, it exploits it. So I just want you to imagine this scene, except now imagine Martha has a smartphone. It's like 10 times worse. So this fall, we as a family are going to be memorizing Psalm 139. I was reflecting on it this last week. If you don't know it, it's like this stunning, stunning piece of Hebrew poetry about how God intimately knows everything about us. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar, it says. And then his presence is inescapable. So Psalm 139 reads like this: where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. And if I make my bed in the depths, you're there. And if I try and hide myself in darkness, you're there as well. Like there's nowhere I can go apart from you. And as I was reflecting on this beautiful psalm about God's knowledge of us and his presence with us this last week, it hit me that with just a few minor changes, this psalm could be about Google. So let me be clear here. I'm not suggesting that we go Amish. I am not a Luddite. I am not anti-technology. I have a smartphone. I live in the same world you do. My job is virtual just like yours is. But as a pastor, I would be remiss if I did not at least point out the fact that with the increasing integration of technology in our lives, our distraction is increasingly has no boundaries. There's nowhere you can escape. When I sit and when I rise, you are with me. If I travel, or if I hike, or if I go to the bathroom, you are there too. If I hide myself in darkness, there you are. The effect of this on our lives is not just a measurable increase in anxiety and strain on relationships, which you can see across our culture. These ever-present distractions, through technology in particular, they diminish our capacity to be aware of God, aware of goodness, aware of beauty and holiness. So traditionally, when Christians talk about this capacity to be present with God, to be aware of his presence, to see his beauty, to see meaning in the universe, to understand our place, to connect with ultimate meaning, when we talk about that word, the Christian word is contemplation. And I don't know what baggage that carries for you. If you don't like it, we can use a different one, right? Use awareness, use presence, something like that. But by contemplation, I merely mean the intimate experiential knowledge of the ultimate meaning of a thing. So, here's what I mean. For example, I can look up and I can study the stars, and I can see these are giant burning balls of gas hundreds of billions of miles apart or something like that, right? I can study them, I can know them, I can analyze them. I can still feel some sense of awe in just looking up at the stars and just feeling that and studying them. But contemplation takes us the next step forward. Contemplation allows us to look up and say, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. That in the stars, I don't just see stuff and I don't just see data points. I don't just feel awe, but I connect that awe with the person of God. That I see the stars and I hear his voice. I hear him speaking to me. That a star, is now connected with ultimate meaning, purpose, beauty. It is tov, tov. Because God has said that it's tov, tov. So down through the ages, Mary, this character right here, Mary has been seen as the prototypical contemplative. Like she is so absorbed in the presence of Jesus that she's oblivious to all lesser, but no less real, needs, demands, stresses, urgent notifications all around her. She's just completely immersed in it, lost in delight. And this is really, really important for two reasons, and then we'll move on. Contemplation. The reason why I'm suggesting we need to have this capacity, nurture this capacity in us. Number one, contemplation is uniquely human. It's part of what makes us who we are, what we're called to be. We're made in the image of God, and contemplation is a way in which we enter into the life of God. We experience him. We connect with what's ultimate. It's what gives our life meaning. It recenters us. It gives us purpose. It allows us to connect and see and understand his beauty and respond in worship and love. That's number one. Number two, and I want to say this explicitly in a less Christian way. Psychologically speaking, contemplation is an integrating activity. It integrates us. It pulls us together. It gives us a sense of self. It helps us make sense of who we are and why we exist. It grounds us, as opposed to distractions, which disintegrate us, that pull us in many directions, that overfill our lives, that make us busy, but we don't know why. Contemplation is an integrating activity, so you don't have to be a Christian to value contemplation. 2011, the Pulitzer Prize finalist book called The Shallows by a guy named Nicholas Carr came out. Nicholas Carr writes this book, 2011, when the internet is big, but it had not even seen what it would become now today, right? And in it, he describes specifically how technology is reshaping the way we think, the way we live as humans, specifically our thinking, and it's literally rewiring our brains. That in this rewiring of our brains, how our neurons grow and fire and function together, we're gaining some things, and we're losing some things. And he writes about it with these words. Nicholas Carr, 2011, The Shallows. He writes, the mental functions that are losing the survival of the busiest brain cell battle are those that support, get this, calm linear thought. So anxiety's going out of control. Ones that are used for traversing a lengthy narrative or an involved argument. The ones we draw on when we reflect on our experiences or contemplate an outward or inward phenomenon. The integration of technology into our lives is diminishing, literally rewiring our brains, diminishing our capacity for contemplation. Not only are we doing it less, we're losing the ability to even do it. And nearly a decade later, it appears that Carr wasn't just guessing, but he was right on. So let me put this in Luke's terms. Luke would say it this way: our ever-present use of technology and the explosion of distractions that brings is stealing our peace, filling us with anxiety, ruining our relationships, and diminishing our capacity to enjoy the presence of God in our lives. Which brings us to the question that we started with. How? How do we, in the most distracted age in the history of the world, when there is literally a conspiracy to capture and sell off our attention, how do we move from distraction to awareness? How do we live in the presence of God? Like, how do we experience the goodness and beauty and holiness of God all around us? And I'm not just talking about how do we do this in some way that allows us to enjoy nature more, because there's almost a direct application between this text and how we're called to live. Before Jesus ascended to heaven, he made the promise, "Lo, I am with you always." And later it says, "I will never leave you or forsake you." That just like Mary and Martha, he promises he's present with us. Now. Right now. That if we want to delight in him the way Mary did, we have to do what Mary did. We have to avoid what Martha did. So I want to give you just a few observations from this text that maybe will give us some insights in our very, very different age than Mary and Martha. But maybe there's some insights from this text. Let me give you 3 observations and then one kind of just like fun idea. All right? The first thing, if we want to experience what Mary experienced, we have to do what Mary did. The first thing you see in this is that we have to, the phrase is, sit at the feet of Jesus. What did Mary do? She sat at the feet of Jesus. And this is something that you've probably heard me preach 100 times, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. But I do want to just emphasize one point here. What Mary's doing is not just a Bible study. It's not just learning facts. That she's immersed in the presence of Jesus. She's oblivious to everything around her, and that's the goal. The goal is not that you learn more Bible facts, although that's important, that's helpful. The goal is not that you analyze a passage and take it apart, though that can be helpful too. The goal is not to know the historical, literary, and all the different features of like this happened in Bethany and this is this person and this happened. That's not the goal either. The goal here is to enter into Jesus' presence and lose yourself in that. And let me just suggest to you one way that's I found helpful along with a few million other people down through the ages. And it's through imagining, so entering into the scriptures by using your imagination. Specifically, reading a text. I would suggest a gospel. You just take a small passage for the day, and you don't just read it, but you imagine it. You taste it, you smell it, you put yourself in the scene, you touch it, you imagine it through the eyes of someone in that scene, you feel it, you hear it, and then you roll it around in your mind. You ask Jesus what he wants you to say. You participate in it. That type of reading is the type of reading that we need to do in order to really begin to experience what God is saying to us, experience his presence. Because when we have that taste of that in the scriptures, and then we come out of that, and it sculpts how we live our daily lives. We begin not only, once we can see Jesus in the scriptures, we can start seeing him outside of the scriptures. Once we can meet Jesus in that time of sitting at his feet, we can start to see him in the kitchen and at work in our commute. So that's the first thing, is that we have to sit at the feet of Jesus. But then I want to back out of this and just bring a few observations about how Mary got there. That's the easy part, right? You can control it. Like every day you should sit down, carve out a set time with the Gospel of John or the Gospel of Mark. You should read a certain passage. You should imagine it, enter into it, pray through it, ask God what he wants you to say. And that is something you can actually do. You can put it on a checklist. Martha could do that. But what does Mary do that Martha doesn't do? She is willing to break cultural norms and disappoint some people. This is the hard part. The hard part about what Mary did is that she broke cultural expectations. She disappointed someone close to her. People were mad at her. She looked lazy. She looked inappropriate. People disapproved. That in order to enter into that, in order to sit at Jesus' feet, she had to disappoint people, break cultural norms. Here's my question. Who do you need to disappoint in order to allow yourself to get there? What cultural norms do you need to break? What if you don't instantly respond to every text you receive? What if you actually power off your phone? What if you make people wait maybe a day to respond to an email? What if after the pandemic's over, you don't just go back to filling your schedule with every possible activity for your family and for your kids and for yourself? What if you don't choose to participate in the world the way the world asks you to? Who do you need to disappoint? What cultural norms do you need to break? The second observation is that it's not enough to just take Martha out of the kitchen and plop her in the living room. She has to deal with the stuff in her heart, the self-righteousness, the need to be busy, her anger, her sense of worth that she gets from being productive, the fact that she doesn't seem to believe that Jesus cares. So, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says it this way: "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Who sees God? The pure in heart. So purity. We usually just think in moral terms, and that's true. Like, yeah, you shouldn't watch terrible movies and hang out with really bad people. Great. But purity that's not just what Jesus is talking about. Purity, like pure gold, is gold made out of one thing, gold. So the purity of heart is when your heart wills one thing. It doesn't desire many, many, many things. In the Psalms, there's this image of blessed is the person in whose heart is a highway to our God. That if you go in their heart, everything in their heart points in one direction. It chases after God. It longs for Him. And that's the idea here, that we need to go through our hearts and find all the desires, all the things that are pulling us in the wrong direction, and we need to pull at those. What underlying heart issues feed your distractions? That's the question. So if you were to go on that long walk at Bryn Coed and actually leave your phone and not have anything to listen to, just you, couple hours, you're going hiking by yourself with God, what are the things that are going to be pulling you away from being fully present in that moment? What are the things that are going to stop you from seeing God and His glory and His presence and experiencing the beauty and goodness of that moment? What are the things that crop up in that time? This is really easy. Like, you can do this as an experiment. If you really want to say, like, what are the things that are leading me to go to distractions again and again? You don't even have to do that. You can very, very simply put yourself in a room with no technology and sit in silence for an hour. If you do that, your soul will immediately tell you about all the things going on that are calling out for distractions. Those are the root issues that you have to deal with. So where do those thoughts come from, and how are you going to confront them with the gospel? And then the last idea I want to toss out has nothing to do with the Bible, but I heard it the other day, actually like a month ago. I read about this. There are these executive coaches in New York City who are coaching these high-powered, high-pressured executives. And these executives, they're answering 500 emails a day. They're constantly working, always busy, distracted by everything you can imagine. Their mind's running a million miles a second. They can't focus. They can't be present. So these coaches, when they get together, their solution is to throw kettlebells at them. Like a kettlebell, like a giant weight with a handle on it. Get this. Get the logic of this. I thought this was brilliant. The idea is that all those things, all those distractions, all those things pulling for your interest, they all go silent the moment a giant kettlebell comes hurtling at you. I'm not joking this. Coaches found out that it's nearly impossible to be distracted when someone throws a massive weight at you. You have to catch it or it's going to crush you. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go around throwing kettlebells at each other, although if that would help, maybe you should do that. Maybe we'll start that in some of our small groups. My point is this. What's your kettlebell experience? We live in a world where we are so gripped with distraction, so addicted to technology and addicted to all these things that we take in 24/7 that we don't even know how to shake them. We need something to break us out of that, or we're going to be trapped in our own inner experience and miss the goodness, beauty, the presence of God in our lives. What is your kettlebell experience that's going to allow you to sit at the feet of Jesus? To realize how cultural norms and are shaping you, and realize that, I got to disappoint some people, and to help you see the heart issues, the underlying heart issues that feed your distractions. For me, my kettlebell experience was just a month ago. I spent a week on a silent retreat at some monastery out in Colorado. I know that sounds like a luxury, and that is a luxury, but maybe there's some small way you can have a kettlebell experience even this week. What is it for you that's going to break you out of it and allow you to recognize the presence of God in your life? That's what I want to leave you with this week. I love you. Miss you. See you next week.